1969 in June, I had finished my college with a Bachelor of Science degrees in Business Administration at San Jose State. And my parents came to the graduation ceremony, and my father thought it would be a good idea to bring two notices from the draft board. One said, "You're now 1A." The other one says, "Report for physical," which kind of ruined the graduation ceremony. I never did really forgive my father for that. But they had me in July. I had the physical, and then in September 10th of '69, I was drafted. They sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training, and in infinite wisdom of the military, they felt my degree in business administration qualified me for the infantry. So I went through basic training in Fort Lewis, Washington in September, and then advanced individual training, AIT, in infantry training there. It was a miserable place only because it rained all the time. We used to have a saying that if you can't see Mount Rainier, that means it's raining. If you can see Mount Rainier, that means it's going to rain. They would break us out without rain gear, get us wet in the morning, then have us go put the rain gear on over the wet, cold clothes. And as a result, if you had a fever over 101, you had to go to the hospital. So they trained us on, I think we trained in basic with the M14. In AIT, we went to the M16. And of course, we trained on machine gun, the M60. We trained on the M79 grenade launcher, and what are the Law rocket launcher, LAW-72, I think it was called. We trained on all those different items. All the graduating classes before mine were going straight to Vietnam. They approached me towards the end of AIT infantry training and said, "Do you want to go to non-com school," which we called shake and bake, which is you went for 12 weeks and you came out as a buck sergeant because they needed more sergeants over there. So I said, sure, and delay going to NOM, I can go with that. When they sent me to Fort Benning for that shake and bake, for that training, they changed my MOS from 11 Bravo, which is the straight infantry, to 11F, which Foxtrot, which is operations and intelligence. So the training was a little more different than just the straight thing. There was a lot of map reading. There was a lot of other things associated with recon elements. And that was at Fort Benning. And then I was sent, after I got my stripes there, I was sent to Fort Carson, Colorado for what they call OJT after that for a few months. And I was made the S2, or the intelligence NCO, for a track battalion, which, of course, there wasn't anything intelligence going on in Fort Carson. We had a great time playing around at the Garden of the Gods and all those areas. We found some caves we could stay out up above below Pikes Peak and above the Garden of the Gods, where we could party and have a good time. So that was a great time. And we did some. I remember one thing that got me is we were doing escape and evasion training that they had. And I was one of as part of the crew that had we tried to capture the other guys that were training there, and, before they could escape and evade. And we had one guy who had returned from Vietnam and had some real anger issues. And he wasn't nice to anybody, and particularly the guys he captured. He told me at one time, "Take this guy around the other tent and beat him up." And of course, I said, "Yeah, come with me." And this guy had returned from Vietnam, and I'm going to go beat him up. So I said, "Just sit over there and relax," because the other guy he was kind of off the charts about this stuff. But most of that was a good memory. They then sent me to Vietnam. And they first sent me to the 4th Division, the 3rd of the 12th Infantry. And they made me the S2, or the Intelligence NCO, in the battalion headquarters, which the battalion headquarters traveled in. We would dig in at a fire base. We would have a temporary fire base. We dig and live in foxholes. on the Firebase, but I didn't have to go out. But it was our job to gather the information from the field calls and everything to plot where the enemy might be, and where we would record where the KIAs and the WIAs occurred, and we would have to brief the colonel in that respect. So I did that for about 2.5, 3 months. We moved 2 or 3 times during that time in different fire bases, but I didn't have to go out into the jungle, shall we say. But then the 4th Division stood down, and like a lot of, and this was early November of 1970, and there was a lot of the battalions where now the war was winding down a little bit. They were sending divisions home. I came from the 4th Division. There was guys that came from the 25th Division and the 75th Rangers, and that were all sent into different places. Some of the guys that I knew were getting they gave them early out, some of them as much as 4 or 5 months, because they needed to downgrade the population. So they were letting the guys out 4 and 5 months earlier. Well, I only had 3 months, so I still had 9 months to serve. So that wasn't the case. They sent me to the Americal division, which the headquarters was located in Chulai, which is on the China Sea. It's a beach. It's on the sea itself. And that was the headquarters for the Americal division. The Americal division was composed of 3 different brigades, of which one of those was the 198th Light Infantry Brigade. That brigade had 3 battalions, one of which that I was assigned to was the 1st of the 52nd Infantry. And I was assigned, because of my 11F, to a Recon platoon. When I got there in November of 1970, we had guys that had come in from the 4th Division and the 25th. We had a full platoon, which is basically about 30 guys, 10 guys per 3 squads. This was my first experience, and even though I was a buck sergeant, we had 2 or 3 Rangers in the platoon. We had 4 or 5 guys that were on their 2nd tour, and so I learned and listened, and instead of I had to find out, how to do things. We basically, what the platoon did was we were kind of the elite on the fire. We operated off a fire base called LZ Stinson, which had originally been called LZ Buff. And what happened is, before I got there in 70 or something like that, the colonel that was the head of the battalion, Colonel Stinson, there was a major fight going on, and he was using his command helicopter to go in and drop off ammo and pick up bodies and stuff. And they were lifting, after he dropped off ammo, they were lifting up off of to take bodies out, and one body started to slip, and he reached over the side to pull it up, and he got shot and got killed. So they renamed the fire base after him. We generally would be going out. They would drop us. We would need to go out in like 5-day missions. We would have to pack all of our gear and food for 5 days, plus all our ammunition. I carried an M16. I also carried a claymore mine that I would use as a mechanical ambush, like a booby trap. And I carried grenades. I carried multiple rounds for the M16 on bandoliers on my chest and my waist, and another one in my backpack. And then because we didn't get resupplied, the line companies would get resupplied while they were out there. They'd have to stay out in the field for like 3 weeks. And then they might be coming on the fire base the 4th week and pull security at the bunkers on LZ Stinson. So we had our own bunkers that we could go back to, but we'd go out for 5 days and then come back and be on the hill. We didn't have to do any duties, but then occasionally we would do nighttime raids of villages, trying to catch the VC coming home to visit Mama San, or the NVA if we could, or anything, hitting them in the middle of the night or one time or another. And we also did what was called eagle flights, where helicopters would pick us up and we'd swoop into an area where there was thought there'd be enemy, we would go into and see if we could interdict them and find them. On January 17th, 1971, we left our fire base at midnight and walked for 2 hours to get to a village. During that time, we still had the full complement of the platoon, and my squad and another squad switched places. And we had been walking the drag, or the last portion, and we moved to the middle portion, and we went to the drag. We were in the middle and we went to the drag, and they became the second squad. I think maybe they were the third squad. We were second squad. They were in the middle. We walked for 2 hours. We had to cross a river where it was above waist high, so we had to put wallets and stuff up in our blouse pockets. And we got online. We came up in the villages there, and we got online, and we were going to sweep into the village at 2 a.m., and they were shooting flares up from the fire base. As we started to move into the ville, the middle squad ran into heavy vegetation, and there was only one way through. The first guy that went through, Dave Kuhn, triggered what turned out to be a booby-trapped 105 artillery shell, which was devastating. He died there. We had two other individuals, John Tex Dobrowski, who died that morning from head injuries after he got on the dust off, and William Blackman, who died in the helicopter. We had one individual, Gary Judy, lost both legs at the knees. We had another individual, Mitchell Neal, lost one leg. All of them were screaming and hollering, and it was a big mess. The Gary Judy, who lost both legs, was the most heroic I'd ever seen. He was sitting there with two legs gone, one at the knee and one right below the knee. And these other guys are screaming and hollering and crying and whatever. And he's telling them it's going to be okay. Okay. That's heroic. We had to, and as we started, they brought in the dust off. We started taking fire. And one of the Papasons in the VC woke up and started firing. So I helped carry Gary to the dust off, and we were loading them on there like firewood because we had to get as many as them we could in there. And at that time, the other two individuals who died were still alive, but had serious wounds. So at that squad was pretty much wiped out. Bert Imato, who's known as Buddha, nickname was Buddha. He was on his second tour, and he had worked his first tour with Special Forces and was dressed like a Vietnamese and ran with them during his first tour. So he was a guy we all respected. He got a serious arm injury, which sent him home. Mitchell Neal had the one leg off. Gary had the other two legs off. Conley Ownby had put his wallet up in his blouse pocket, and he had a piece of shrapnel that was right over his heart. Hit that wallet and flattened out and knocked the shit out of him, but it didn't go through. Can you imagine? When we started taking fire, automatic reactions to go to the ground, and I guess I lost my wallet there too. But we also had an Army photographer, Al Rockoff, who was wounded in action. Interesting, this individual, I don't know if you ever saw The Killing Fields, that movie about Cambodia. Malkovich played him in the movie because Al Rockoff had gone back after got out of the Army continuously every year to Cambodia to photograph the atrocities and what was going on there. He hated Malkovich's portrayal as it was. But we were upset. The battalion commander wanted us to enter that village. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Bartlett, who we trusted, decided that we were not going to do so because he knew what might happen. It wasn't going to be good because we were angry, scared, and wanted to do something. So if we'd gone to that village, some bad things would have happened. He in turn was transferred to a line company because of that. So we had a solemn walk back that morning, and we had to walk back to the Firebase again. And then we had that service there at the Firebase for the three that died. It was a very traumatic experience for all of us, and it's one that I relive off and on all the time. It's part of my PTSD because never got raised with me. As it is, just in conjunction with that, we have started connecting again from Vietnam veterans back in 1997, and we started having reunions. And a number of the same guys that were at that incident have been coming to those reunions. So you can't relate to anybody else than you can to another veteran. And when you've gone through the traumatic experiences, that it bonds you. And we're still doing that to this day. We've had reunions. As a matter of fact, we had a young 19-year-old staff sergeant by the name of Phil. We called him Baby Ranger Furley. He was 19 years old. His parents had both served World War II. He joined, and he was intending to have a career in the Army. He went to basic training, then he went to the NCO school, Shake and Bake, and became a sergeant. And then he went to Ranger school and completed that, and they gave him another stripe. So he was a staff sergeant at 819. And yeah, I'll tell you about he got wounded badly the next month. But he in turn hosted a bunch of reunions, and one we had in 2001 in Missouri. We honored those three individuals that were killed and brought family members there, and a fourth one that got killed in April. But so we've been doing that for years. And I'm originally from California, the San Francisco Bay Area, but when I transferred from the 4th Division up to the Americal, I had a day or two in July, and I think I got some herbal essence or something. And the next day I walked into it. There was a USO building there, and they had a snack bar, some writing tables, and some other stuff. And there was a bulletin board, and there was a bunch of letters attached to that bulletin board. And I pulled this letter from this young lady from Corpus Christi, Texas, by the name of Eva Science. And I wrote this really weird letter to her, and we started communicating. And it was her letters that helped me through the jungles of my mind, is what I can say. And we got, because she was an English major at Texas A&I in Kingsville at the time. She had actually written a letter because a girlfriend of hers lost her fiance over there. Thought it'd be a good idea to send a letter to somebody, and she hooked me. So and when I got out of the Army, I ended up buying a 65 Volkswagen camper van and started traveling from San Francisco Bay Area down to Corpus Christi. It took me a few months because I had some adventures along the way. And I had 3 weeks in the hospital with malaria. But I got down there about 3 months later in November, because I got out in August '71, and we were together, and we got engaged. Long story short, we've now been married 48 years. We spent time in Corpus Christi, and we spent 20 years in San Francisco Bay Area because I worked there in San Francisco. And then in '98, we moved back to here, to Texas. And we live in Spring, Texas now, where we've been. But getting back, so there's a story that you don't hear too often. But and she's made my life much better, by all means, and put up with all this crap that I had going on. In February, I think it was 12th or something, we were dropped into Happy Valley, which is a misnomer. It's like military intelligence. It wasn't a happy place because the NVA had control of the area. It's a mountainous area with a lot of rivers and stuff, and heavy elephant grass in different areas. We were searching for the enemy again. Looking for, and we'd seen some NVA down below us and called in artillery that day. And the next day we were going to go over to see if we can find the results. We were climbing on the side of a hill in elephant grass that was about 6 foot high. And it's very thick, and the edges on the elephant grass are very sharp. They can cut your arms and one thing or another. It's really a nasty stuff to go through. And the lead element, the point, was cutting a pathway through it. I was walking at the drag, or the last part of it. Baby Ranger was behind me, and I was ahead of him. And then our platoon sergeant, Sergeant Bragg, was ahead of me. And we had just come around a curve, and we stopped for a minute. And it turned out the word came down that they couldn't go any further where they're going. So we were going to have to turn around and take the point and go a different way. Baby Ranger took a few steps. There was a shot, and he went down. I went down. And then I looked up and saw I'd seen a flash or something. So I got up and started spraying the area with my M16 because you couldn't see anything because it's so thick. We had to call in a basket to take him out. He got shot through his front and came out his back. And we had to get a basket lowered, and they brought in the jet to pound the area because we knew there was more dinks around. And we got him out of there. The next day, I recovered the rifle. The guy dropped the rifle. We thought it was a SKS. It wasn't until many years later that we found out it was a Soviet M44. But the next day, we were coming down off the side of the mountain, and we crossed a river and started the platoon was left of it, because I think back that time we only had 18 or so anyway. But they took off, and I stayed behind with 2 snipers to see if anybody was following us. And we were behind some boulders, and sure enough, somebody popped up. I shot him. I only could see the shoulder and the head, but I shot him, and he went down, and we had to maneuver around the rocks. And he apparently had gone across the river, but there was a tremendous amount of blood and papers and stuff laying there. So we started tracking him with my best buddy, Chris Ruckty, had a radio, and I think we had a Kit Carson scout. We were following the blood trail up, and it was going up the side of the hill. And blood trail started getting less and less. So our Kit Carson scout, who we trusted, said, "Don't go any further," because he knew there was an ambush waiting for us. So we backed off. But I don't think that individual survived. He was too much blood. And anyway, the rifle was sent. I had the rifle sent to Baby Ranger's house, and he kept that rifle all those years and kept it under his bed as a memory. Many years later, in '98, I finally found him again, and he came to our second reunion, and he still had the rifle, and he credited me with saving his life because I got the helicopter there and helped, get after the guy. Unfortunately, he in turn hosted a bunch of reunions for us in Missouri until his death in 2006, I think it was. He had 21 surgeries as a result of that one wound, lots of blood transfusions. When he was sent to the hospital in Japan, the doctors were giving up on him. His mother, who was a nurse, Ruth, was a nurse in World War II, flew over to Japan and took charge of his care, and they made him save him. But he ended up having those 21 surgeries, but he stayed in the Army until after Desert Storm. And I've talked to people that he trained, and they said he was one of the best Ranger trainers they ever had. So he was quite, he was quite the guy. So we found him. But when he passed, his family gave me the rifle, and we use that now at the reunions to put it in the ground with boots, a couple pair of boots and a hat in memory of individuals. So that's a personal issue there too. But
the continue, we got down to the point where there was like only 18 of us. So we had to start off, we would get dropped in by helicopter, but we split into 6-man groups and go separate directions and then meet up 3 or 4 days later. So at that time, you had to be very, very quiet. You had to be, nobody slept. I mean, no, there wasn't such thing. We didn't carry even shovels to make a foxhole, but we slept on the ground. That's all we had. We had a poncho and a poncho liner. If the weather wasn't raining or wet or muddy, you could hook 2 of them together and sleep underneath it, maybe. But the mosquitoes were always ferocious, and then the leeches were all over the place too. They'd sit on the side up in the mountains and stuff. They'd sit on tree limbs and drop on you, or they'd be in the water, or they'd be sitting on the side of the path you're going down, with sitting up on their little butts with their figuring to try to grab onto you. And that's why I always wore my pant legs inside my boots with an extra set of laces all the way up to my knee almost, to try to keep the leeches out. Plus, it gave you a possible better way to feel tripwires than having the loose pants. So you had a chance that you could feel it because you had tight there. The other main thing that was important to me was the towel. The towel cushioned the rucksack, because the rucksack, when we left for 5 days, we had 5 days worth of rations, sea rations and everything. And that towel helped cushion it, because the ruck was now weighing 60 to 80 pounds with everything you had to carry. And it got heavy. I remember walking to the lift pad on Stinson and barely making it up the hill walking. It was something, because I was back then, I was about 140, 145. And it was that way for all of us, because we had to, and so you eat the big cans first. That's what amounts to it. But we had one other individual. I was actually on leave at that time of my R&R, but he got killed in an ambush. Michael Peters in April 1st of 71. And then I got sick in May with some kind of thing, and I had a fever, and I was in the hospital in July for 3 or 4 days. And they gave me a light duty for a week. Well, they sent me out to a small Firebase that it was called, we called it Mickey Mouse, but I think it was Hatan. And it was an old Special Forces Firebase. It had a bunker in the middle with 4 guard positions in trenches. They had a trench around it with 4 different guard positions. And there was a mountain yard, or a village, that had been relocated down below us next to the river. And then there was an ARVN battalion about 2 clicks away on the other side of the river. But these were 2 artillery guns, 105s, that were shooting missions for the 1st to 52nd. They were the 1st to the 14th Artillery. Well, I got down there and I said, whoa, this is way remote. We're in a valley surrounded by mountains. So I went out. I was well enough. I went out and I cut off and went in the wire and strung some more wire, and I put in about 25 or 30 more trip flares in the wire. And I also, when I was in Recon, I had started using ground sensors. They're little cones that you stick in the ground. There's 4 of them, and you have a receiver earplug, and one beeps 1, one beeps 2, one beeps 3, one beeps 4, and they pick up vibrations. And I would put those out around our position at night. So I brought those over there too. And they liked the fact that I stayed up all night to make sure the guards were up and one thing or another. So they liked me being there. And I had 4 other grunts that were there on light duty or something. But it was, other than that, it was all the artillery guys, and they were shooting a lot of missions. And that's what helps screw up my hearing too, because we're right there at the 105s going off. Yeah. But it was actually present. I could live in cutoffs because they didn't have any real lifers that were there. We had a young lieutenant and a sergeant from the artillery guys. They didn't care if we dressed in cutoffs or anything else. If somebody came in, we'd put on a uniform, but I've got brown there. Speaking of, I'll tell you the scariest thing that ever happened to me too was the same thing was with that booby trap, Claymore Mine. One time we'd humped all day and we were setting up a TOC or a tactical operations center up on the top of a hill. Well, I always would put the the Claymore mine. We set it up with, the 9-volt battery powered it. You had they connected to it, and you had a tripwire with fish line and a clothespin. And I'd set it up somewhere where I thought the enemy might be coming. And then I'd set the ground sensors out beyond that so we could hear, hear the vibration. And it was getting towards dusk, and I was having trouble with the ground sensors. And so I kept going back and forth. And I came back and was getting real closer to dark. And all of a sudden I felt that tripwire in my leg. And for that split second, did I disconnect the 9-volt? Obviously I did, but my whole life flashed before me, just like that. Because a lot of guys got blown up. But, that was feeling that tripwire in my leg, just, it got my, but that's we had more people killed and wounded by booby traps than anything else. We found a ton of booby traps too, but the enemy that night, one of the things that happened as our result of our reunions is we started talking to each other on the first one, and we all realized we were suffering from the same stuff: sleep issues, anger, the stuff that was PTSD. And we found out at that time in 1997 that 80% of the PTSD awards were going to non-combat vets because they knew how to work the system. So we started comparing notes, and we said, we need to do something to help each other. So after a 2000 reunion in Massachusetts, 3 of my Recon brothers, that baby Ranger, Gary Judy that had lost both legs, and Bill Miller, traveled from Massachusetts down to College Park, Maryland, where the National Archives are. And Bill Miller lived in that area, but they spent over a week physically photocopying what's called the daily staff journals, which are the calls from the field into headquarters, and they're all typed up by time and date every day. And it shows where the units are, if they had contact with someone, who was killed, who was wounded, how many enemy were killed, that type of thing. They're official records. Well, we sent those off to another guy who's Dan Young, who's a good friend of mine that was in A Company, but I knew him from Stinson, and he's a geologist in Anchorage. And we sent them off to him, and he organized through his secretary and sent out. We finally got them digitized from those records that they shipped them to him, and got them digitized after 2 or 3 years or more I took. But that way, the guys, when they're making their claims to the VA for PTSD or anything, a lot of times the VA is not our friend and they wouldn't accept. Well, they now had a record that can say, I was there when that happened. That's why I have this issue. So that helped guys. And about 4 or 5 years after that, we got contacted by a guy in the Netherlands who had found some buttons or something there that belonged to an armored unit in World War II, U.S. armored unit. And he had in turn written a history of that unit and had made contact with these people. Well, he found out that armored unit eventually became our infantry battalion in the 1st and 52nd. And so he contacted us. So we now had all those daily staff journals and everything, and we sent those to him. Plus, guys started sending in their own stories and photographs. So he took him another 8 to 10 years to put all that together, but it ended up being the entire history of this battalion from the time it arrived in 1967 till we left in 1971. It was published in 3 volumes. And what's interesting is it was published by a guy who was a lieutenant in Vietnam with this battalion, who became a general, Douglas Dollar, and owned a publishing company in New Mexico. And he published it. So the book is called Battlefield 44. And that was the name that they gave. It's available on Amazon. And so that's the name that the enemy gave the area around Chulai, was Battlefield 44. So I even wrote some stuff in that in volume 3 because at the time, my time frame, I was there. But so we now have a complete history, a personal history of this thing that the guys have that we've arranged. It's quite impressive. And it took many years to get done. And this group I'm with now in Houston is called the Vietnam Combat Veterans Association. I joined them because we're trying to erect a monument to the fallen that came from Houston. Houston is the 4th largest city in the country and does not have a Vietnam memorial. So it turns out that one guy, that Ben Gutierrez, has been his dream, and his group, they have a monument built. And he was attending he has a vet center group that meets in the same building and interlocking team with the vet center group that I've been going to since 2003. And it turns out in my group, there's a guy in the group that's a monument maker, Bobby Schlissenberger, who is an armored driver or tank commander. And he's built all the monument. They started talking and they worked it. And of course, the reason I got involved was because John Tex Dabrowski, that was one of those killed, is from Houston. And since I got moved back here in '98, I go to his gravesite on Memorial Day and Veterans Day and talk to the other guys and go visit them. And turned out I hooked up with some of his high school buddies. A bunch of them went into the service together at the same time, and he was the only one that was killed. So they appear in his grave somewhere, and I may become friends with them too. But so we're doing that, and we're working towards getting this built. It's going to honor the 458 young men that came from Houston and the 7 surrounding counties, and it'll be in black monolith like the wall, because not everybody can afford to go to DC. And this way they'll have something local, and it'll be in black monolith. And we also have a walk of honor for any veteran on the ground. We're selling squares, or 6-inch by 12-inch granite and people can put in 4 lines of their own information, so we can help raise money for the monument. But most of us that were served in Vietnam we're passing very fast, and if we don't get these things done now and get these memories established, they won't be around anymore. Nobody will care. Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that what you're doing is helping to do that, to keep these memories alive. And I think everybody can learn from them as to what happened in the past and what occurred, in those days.